Hello, this is my second video in the UCAT series, and today I'm going to be talking about the abstract reasoning section of the UCAT. If you would like to see more videos on the BMAT and more videos on the UCAT, they are coming up soon as well. Please do subscribe if you would like to see more. And without further ado, let's begin with my tips for the UCAT abstract reasoning section. So tip number 1, make sure you keep a list of the patterns. So whilst practicing, if I came across any weird patterns, for example, there are like 4 boxes, and in each box what's happening is that once the shape is rotating and it's reflecting in each box, so like something very strange like that, I would make a note of that kind of pattern. I would keep a list of those kind of patterns, and then what I would do is review those. That list would just build up slowly and slowly until I have a list of all the difficult patterns that I didn't get a hang of at first, or it took me a while to identify them, and then that thought process just remains with you because you have it written down, so it sticks with you for longer. And the other thing I would do is review that list at regular intervals. So every 2 days or something like that, whenever I'm practicing, I would review that list and make sure those patterns are refreshed in my brain, because they could come up again in the exam, right? But then not just that they could come up again, they could also, like, a different pattern could come up which is similar to that, but that helps to train your brain in that thought process. So it's a very, very useful way of keeping a track of which different patterns you should know. And by the time your exam comes, that list will become so long, and then you can refresh those patterns the day before the exam. And if any weird patterns come up in your exam, you might actually be able to identify them, which is really, really good. The next tip is to keep a written list of all the distractors, not just the patterns. So distractors are things which grab your attention from the actual point of the pattern, and they try and make you think that the pattern is more complicated than it actually appears to be. So for example, like random stars or just some random entity that is not supposed to be there, but it's just there to distract you, and you might think that that's the focus of the pattern, but then it actually just distracts you from the actual rotation or whatever the pattern actually is. And these are designed in a way that your eyes are attracted towards them. If you keep a list, you're going to start identifying by yourself what are the most common distractors in these kind of questions, and then you'll have a reference point of even like checking which distractors you've come across before and which ones you haven't come across before, so then you can actually use that list as well. And it's way easier for your brain to actually remember that distractor rather than just you reading that distractor once in a practice question, and then you just forgetting about it. That's why writing down distractors is a very useful idea, because it helps train your brain into thinking about where the distractors actually come from. And like you can see in different kinds of questions that they do tend to use similar types of distractors. The next tip is about memorizing common themes that trigger certain patterns. So for example, if you see overlapping shapes, then your brain might be triggered to actually count the intersections between the shapes, because that might be the pattern. Otherwise, why would you even have overlapping shapes in the first place? So in that same way, you should memorize these certain themes, because that's what causes these patterns to be grouped together. Another example of this may be if you see a lot of symmetry in the boxes. So if you see a lot of symmetry in the different boxes, then you'll know that the pattern might be related to symmetry. Or if you see like crescent-shaped moon objects in each of the patterns, then you'll know that you actually might have to count the number of curved sides and the number of straight sides. Do those things sound familiar? So in the same way, if you write those kind of things down, then you will have a better idea of how to identify those in an exam situation at a very, very rapid pace. The next tip is about starting with the simplest box. So you have a pattern with 4 different boxes, and all of them look really, really complicated. So where do you actually begin? You actually start from looking at the simplest box, because when you do look at the simplest box, you identify what are the key elements of that box, and then in that box there's usually the least distractors as well, the least number of distractors. So then you can identify working out the pattern from there, working it from the least complicated to the most complicated. And the simplest box may be the lowest number of shapes, the least number of distractors, or the box with the fewest number of complicated color variations. And because you don't have any distractors in the box, you know what the common elements are between different boxes. So you will know that, for example, in all of the boxes you have a circle, and then you will know that, okay, this is the element, this is the entity that I'm actually going to focus on. In terms of the sequence, you're going to track that object specifically, instead of looking at the distractors, which might just be there to waste your time. The next tip is that if you're stuck, make sure you use the NSPCC strategy. So this strategy is shown here. It's number, size, position, color, and confirmation. So this is the strategy that you should use. And if you get stuck at any point, just remember this strategy, because then you can identify the different components and then you can work your way logically through these different things. And the reason why this improves your timing is that because it's a methodological strategy. So you actually have a set method there. In case you are stuck, in case you are panicking or nervous, then you know where to begin from, and it saves your time in that way, because you usually do end up figuring out the pattern when you do work through this kind of strategy. You don't want to just rely on eyeballing or luck just to help you that, oh, if I stare at this for very long, I'll figure out the pattern. No, you should work through it systematically, because that improves your chances quite dramatically. And with that, make sure you remember that you can learn these simple tricks. So for example, the block arrows, you have an arrow like this. So that kind of arrow, that arrow has 7 sides. So if you know that from now, that those kind of arrows have 7 sides, you do not need to waste your time in the actual exam counting how many sides each arrow has. You just have to be there are 6 arrows, so that will be 6 times 7. So you can work it out that way, instead of, if you already know the number of sides and you know these small tricks, then you can save yourself a lot of time in the exam. The next tip is to do as many questions as possible and to start early in the actual exam, because you do not have time to waste. And especially if you've never done the 11 plus, or if you've never done a grammar school test or anything like that, then you must be very, very unfamiliar with the concept of abstract reasoning. So if you start early, then you will know, your brain will get used to the process of figuring out patterns and shapes and things like that very, very quickly. So do make sure you begin early. For the ISC medical book, the green book is what I used as well for the UCAT. But with that book, the problem is that the abstract reasoning questions are extremely hard in it. So I began with Medify and the UCAT questions on the UCAT website. Those are the best thing to use, and then you can move to the abstract reasoning book when you feel like you've done all the easy questions possible and you feel confident with those kinds of questions. And the final tip is that don't spend too much time on one question. There are complicated patterns in between to just trick you. There are going to be these complicated patterns in the exam. There's no hiding away from them. You just have to do all the easy questions first, and then you should come back to the harder questions. That's the strategy that I would say that you should use. And it might just be about perspective. It might not be that you can't figure it out. It's just that you're stressed about it too much. So if you look at that question later with a fresh mind, you might actually get it right, rather than staring at it for 10 minutes straight. So do be careful with timing. Another thing is, if you feel like you're stressed and that's why you don't know, try looking at it from a bit further. Try looking at the question a bit further from the screen, because if you go a bit further from the screen, it's a different kind of angle, so you might get a better overall picture of what the pattern actually might be about. Thank you so much for watching today's video, and please do subscribe if you would like to see more of the UCAT videos and the BMAT videos. And I'm gonna have videos on upcoming interview tips as well, and just loads of things like that. And if you have any questions about medicine or anything in general, please drop me a DM in my Instagram account. The link is in my description. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Bye.